Hello everyone, so this is Lala, and clearly by the title and the pictures that are in the video, you can clearly tell what I'm going to be talking about today. I've been thinking about the mixed race or the biracial community or communities specifically, and why the lack of visibility for them, not only just in media via celebrities, but in reality TV overall, and just in general, is very problematic to say the least. But when you think of biracial, you generally think of two types of biracial people, and without me even saying it, I bet that you already know the two that I am referring to. With this in mind, I notice that there's kind of a hierarchy when it comes to who is visible and represented as a biracial person, and which biracial group or groups is more hidden. And before I continue, I'm going to go off of the three main quote unquote races, or the main ones at least. So I'm going to be basing this off white, black, and Asian. The older words for these were that are outdated now are Caucasoid, Negroid, and Mongoloid, because that's the base of what race was seen as when it was created, and obviously it has evolved throughout the centuries. But that is the base of what I'm working with here. And I'm going to delve into the nuances of these groups and the racial groups within them. Okay, so we live in a world that has a lot of white supremacy for a plethora of reasons. And with biracial people, it of course affects them in a different way. Due to this, I do notice that people who are biracial with white are more visible than other non-white biracial people, to the point where people automatically assumes that biracial means half white, despite the fact that you can be biracial without being part white at all. But it is the white supremacy of it at all, where it shows that mixed raceness is automatically assumed as being part white. And you can tie that to colonialism and a whole bunch of other nasty history there. It does become clear when looking at media and just the visibility of certain biracial groups that the ones that are mixed with white are more visible and acknowledged slash privileged due to their proximity to whiteness, though of course that proximity to whiteness is always conditional, which we might get into throughout the video. Okay, so now it is time for me to talk about the different type of biracial groups. The first one that I'm discussing, and the ones that seem to be the most privileged, or at least in my eyes from what I have found, are biracial people with Asian and white. So this could also be called Wasian people or Hapa people, especially with it being focused on white Europeans and East or Southeast Asian biracial people. Those are the main groups that fit, at least those two terms. Asian women and white men primarily are the largest interracial relationship, so it makes sense that their offspring would be one of the most popular biracial groups in the demographic. Though, from what I've seen historically, especially in the Western world, it was kind of the opposite, where the most popular white Asian interracial relationship or marriage was with white, more often than not poor, white women and Asian men, whether they were richer or not, or they are just Asian men who migrated to the Americas to work. And because there weren't many Asian women in the Americas at the time, they felt like they had no choice other than to marry white women. What I notice about Wasian people is that a lot of them still have Asian features, but with a few European features or with colored eyes, and there are others who look more European. Some, or a lot more of them, still look pretty Asian, or they have that East Asian slash Southeast Asian phenotype, and others look very ambiguous or quote unquote exotic, which is pretty much just hard to read in certain people's eyes. What I noticed is that whenever a Asian person is on a television show, scripted or non scripted, or a movie, they are representing an Asian person more often than not. They aren't representing a white person, despite them being half white or Awasian, which will be more accurate for them. Due to the Eurocentricity and being still attached to Asian people, They are more than often not propped up by both sides in relation to monoracial Asian people, at least in the media, though in their own communities, within their everyday lives, they can and often do feel othered in their monoracial Asian communities and monoracial white communities. Though a lot of that has to do with the pathology of their parents, since some parents of biracial children tend to have biracial children, but they don't have the mental capacity to either deal with their children's unique identity or for them to get over their prejudices and hatred for the other race that makes up their kid. Another element that I didn't notice is the whole last name thing, where Asian or biracial Asian and white people tend to have European last names more often than not. And with them having European last names, it more often than not indicates mixed with European heritage, which gives them that privilege and benefit and able to blend into Eurocentricity. And some Asian actors and actresses definitely use this to their advantages. And due to the fact that they have anglicized or just European last names, gives them that privilege over monoracial Asian actresses and actors. And I believe an actress named Chloe Bennett changed her Asian last name to a white last name so she could assimilate even more. From what I could find historically in the Western world regarding Asian people, is that they were essentially one dropped to being represented as full Asian, though it wasn't nearly as enforced as it was for biracial white and black people regarding the one drop rule, but it was something pretty similar in that regard, and that's still kind of the case today, where whenever you see a Asian actor having success, they're titled as Asian, never as white, and rarely even Asian. And it's the same thing with reality TV stars, where you have people like Casey being titled as a Big Brother Asian winner, or the Challenge Asian winner, despite her being half white, and them never calling her a white winner, or a Asian winner, which would be more accurate. Overall, it seemed like their Eurocentricity caused them to be put on a pedestal when it comes to Asian representation, though they may receive hatred from both sides. But in a lot of these Asian countries, they are put on a pedestal. They are a lot of the successful actors, they win a lot of the beauty pageants, and when it comes to the United States, while they never represent white people, they will definitely represent a lot of Asian people as well, which can be seen as problematic, but also a gift for representation for Asians overall. And I feel like they are more privileged than other biracial groups, especially biracial with black groups, because blackness is seen as something that's quote unquote taintable or something that's tainted compared to Asian. So they are put on more of a pedestal and they're probably easier to pass as white compared to biracial with black people. And since black people on average are darker than Asian people, it causes for that tipping scale to favor Asians more in comparison. There really wasn't much for me to find when it came to biracial with white and Pacific Islanders when it comes to the Western world and the celebrities and reality stars in general. But from the few that I could see, some look outright white, some look very ethnic, and there really isn't much regarding their experiences that I could find online. And while Pacific Islanders aren't Asian, they are closely related to them due to the migration patterns. And then there are the people who are biracial with white and South Asian, and I don't know what the term for this type of biracial is. And obviously, South Asians are included to be Asian in the West, especially in America, though in some areas, mainly in Europe, when they refer to Asian, they're actually referring to South Asian and not Southeast or East Asian, like how some North Americans would think it would be the inverse, since it's the inverse or the reverse in Canada and the United States. Obviously, South Asians are very different genetically from their Southeast and East Asian counterparts to the point that they do have some Caucasoid admixture in them and their proximity to the Middle East, though they have a lot of Vedoid, which is kind of like Pacific Islander-esque, and some have East or Southeast Asian admixture, which is why they are generally in the middle between what was called Mongoloid and what was called Caucasoid, to the point where even some of the South Asians were considered Caucasoids themselves. So when it comes to this biracial mix, because there's such a wide range in looks and skin colors when it comes to South Asians, some of them still look like your average South Asian person, being relatively darker skinned, or if they're light skinned, they just look like a lighter skinned South Asian person. Though some do look outright white, so there is that, and I would assume a lot of them would be mixed with British due to the British colonialism that took place in that area for hundreds of years, and I don't really have much else to say. But there really isn't much talked about when it comes to this type of biracial group, outside of the fact that they are often put in the spotlight and pushed heavily in Bollywood and the pageants over there. So for this category, I could have put all mestizos here, but the current mestizos that are living now generally are multi-generationally mixed. It's not like they have a Native American parent and a white parent for the most part, outside of a few exceptions. Anyways, when you have a half Amerindian Native American person and a half white person, I notice that they tend to be relatively light skinned for the most part, unless the Native American is South American, like a Benjamin Bratt. Outside of that, they're usually lighter, especially when your Native American side comes from North America. And they definitely do have the stereotypical slanted eyes and kind of the pointy nose and the very sharp features, though their face is also kind of fuller as well. And then there's the height thing as well. Some of them actually do look very white, though others essentially do look native, but they're just lighter. It really just depends. Though there are some that are very white passing too. Now it's time to move on to another biracial group, and the other one that is attached to white people are biracial people with black and white. They, on average, are seen as less privileged than biracial people with Asian and white, or Asians, or Hapas. And this is due to their quote unquote blackness, quote unquote tainting them, which legally and socially has been, and in some cases still is, true, with the stupid ass one drop rule that the United States was obsessed with, and many people in both the white and black communities holding on to this rule. Biracial people in this group are, in general, never claimed as white. Heck, white people with a drop of admixture, meaning a quarter black, i.e., quadroons, an eighth black, i.e., octoroons, so on and so forth, were forced to identify as black for a lot of the 19th and 20th centuries, causing stuff like the Blue Vein Society, which was essentially a high elite, quote unquote, black group, which was essentially a bunch of white people with a drop of admixture, not even mulattoes, which is what biracial people were considered back in the day, used to uphold white supremacy, where anyone who was more closer to white had all the good black jobs, lived in the good black neighborhoods, so on and so forth, where they discriminated monoracial or darker skinned and or darker skinned black people. So that's why the superiority in the black community in the West tend to lean towards mixed people or biracial people. Honestly, it was mainly towards white people with a drop of admixture. And some of that mentality still exists today, to the point where they even removed the mulatto category from the US Census sometime around the 19th century and just grouped everyone in that group and monoracial black people as black, and it still somewhat hasn't been reversed today. Historically, especially relating to slavery, not just in the West but also in the East regarding the Arab slave trade as well, in addition to the transatlantic slave trade, biracial people were initially the result of the mother, which were enslaved, or who were enslaved being or having grapes, if you can read between the lines, with their white enslaver by non consent. So that is how the biracial child initially would come out. And because in society, especially in regards to slavery and property, the offspring is what their mother is, the biracial child will grow up to be a biracial man and would be considered a black slave under those circumstances. So that's kind of how it continued on and on. And due to this indoctrination over so many years, even centuries up until this point, we enter today where biracial people are more often than not still seen as black people. And it causes an issue because, one, their white counterparts or their white parent and their white side never really acknowledges them as a part of the community and more often than not tells them to identify as black. There are many celebrities that talk about this, and you have their white lineage really failing to take accountability or responsibility for the child's identity or their child's existence as well, just kind of pushing them to be with black people. But at the same time, you have black people who are indoctrinating a lot of the biracial people and are pushing them to be the representation of black people, partially due to internalized colorism, featureism, and texturism, but also a lot of the biracial people knowing that they have privilege in the black community where they don't have that in the white community. So that's kind of where it balances out in a weird way. And then when it comes to the media, when it comes to black people or black representation, a lot of media, film, television, etc., is owned by white people, let's be real. And to cater to a wider audience, they will more often than not cast a biracial person who, in general, has more Eurocentric features, lighter skin, silkier hair textures over a black person because they're seen as more marketable to worldwide audiences. And while white people don't consider biracial people as one of their own, they feel more relatable, or biracial people are seen as more relatable, more marketable, more soft compared to a monoracial black person. So that's why a lot of the celebrities you see that are quote unquote black are more often than not biracial. And even on reality shows, they do this a lot. And even just historically, the first black whatever is in discussion is more often than not, or was more often than not, a biracial person due to the privileges that they have in the black community and being closer to was considered normative, which is whiteness. Now it is time to go over the different types of black and white biracial groups. And the first one that I'm referring to is the biracial people who are mixed with African, meaning directly from Africa. So these type of biracial people are literally half black and half white, since there's no mixture with their African parent, and obviously there's no admixture with their white counterpart. On average, so this is the average, not the exception, and not for all of them, they tend to be darker skinned. They tend to have more Afrocentric features in comparison to some of the other biracial groups I'm going to get into. They tend to have type 4C hair more often than not, and they tend to look less ambiguous in comparison, since they're literally split in the middle between black and white, DNA wise at least. Obviously, there are some that are lighter in comparison, but it is not a regular occurrence, especially compared to some of the other half black, half white biracial groups that I'm going to be talking about. The second group I'm going to be referring to are the biracial people who are mixed with African American or West Caribbean or West Indies. And I'm separating them from the biracial with African biracials because the Black Caribbeans and the Black Americans do have minor and distant European ancestry due to the grapes that they were so called eating in or during slavery. If you catch my drift, I'm trying not to say certain words because YouTube doesn't like certain words. So if the average Caribbean, Black Caribbean or Black American has roughly around 80% sub-Saharan African DNA, and they get with a white person who, more often than not, is 100% white. Their child is more often than not going to be roughly around 60% white and 40% black. Though that varies, and some biracials in this group could have a bit more sub-Saharan or a bit more balanced, like 45-55. And so there are some, like Corey from the challenge, who is literally 31% black and 68 or 69% white due to his black American father having a lot of admixture himself. So that tends to happen with some of the biracial people here. And due to that, they more often than not are a lot lighter, though there are still some that are very dark. They tend to have looser hair texture, so type 3, some maybe type 2, though there are, of course, some type 4 hair people in this hair group too. Some do have lighter eyes and softer, more Eurocentric features in comparison. There are a few more black and white biracial groups that I want to go over, though I'm not going to go over them into nearly as much detail. So the first one refers to the people who are biracial with Somali and white. Or I shouldn't just say Somali, that's the group I'm most used to, but they're mixed with Horn of African being their quote unquote black half and being mixed with white as well. Horn of Africans have a lot of pre-Arab admixture, but it's West Eurasian ancestry actually in the middle of their admixture with East African. So due to this, Horn of Africans overall have more slender features. So when you mix that with a white person to create a biracial child, the offspring of Horn of African and European mixed children tend to lean a lot more white looking, though you can still see some of those Horn of African features. The next biracial group in this subgrouping, or in this group that fits, are people who are biracial with black and their white half, or their Caucasoid half, is Arab. And this is a different type of biracial mix, since despite being Caucasoid or white in certain countries, Arabs are seen as differently from Europeans. And I think a part of this is due to the fact that some Arabs have some slight admixture. Some of them have slight admixture that is sub-Saharan African, though I think that's about like 5 to 15 or 20%, depending on where in the Arab world this is. And due to their indigenous North African or West Asian features having a few different features compared to their European counterparts, it causes for the biracial black and Arab children or people to definitely look different. And I notice on average, they tend to have coarser hair on average. And I don't really see many of them having light eyes, and they don't look as Eurocentric in comparison. And the final group of biracial people that fits the black and white label are the ones who are mixed with black and white Latino. Emphasis on white Latino, since a lot of people still think Latino is a race. It doesn't really mean much, since you can have uh, half black or half non-Latino black and a half black Latino, and they wouldn't be biracial. And you can have a half non-Latino black person mixed with a mestizo or a mulatto Latino, and they wouldn't be biracial. If anything, they would be multiracial in that case. But if you are a non-Latino black and you merge with a white Latino person to create a biracial child, that is definitely a biracial child. Since white Latinos, on average, do have a bit of admixture. It might be African admixture, it might be indigenous admixture, but it is still minuscule compared to the non white Latino counterparts. But it does make them different compared to their European counterparts. So they can vary so much on looks, but they're mainly white and black, though they have a drop of indigenous blood in there. And now it is time to talk about the final biracial group. And just from what I have seen, it seems like the biracial group that is the least visible are the biracial with Asian and Black people, otherwise known as Blasian people. I mentioned in the two other biracial groups that their proximity to whiteness causes them to be more visible, since a lot of people have the inaccurate description and mentality that biracial somehow equals half white, essentially centering whiteness in biracial identities. A biracial person that is mixed with Black and Asian are not given that opportunity or the same opportunity. So, hence them not having much visibility in the media, whether it's Western or Eastern, and they tend to be more isolated from the Black and Asian communities that they're related to, even compared to Black and white biracial people and white and Asian biracial people, who are more visible in their minority groups. There really isn't much discussion about the Blasian identity overall. And from the collage I have here, the top half are people who are mixed with Black and East or Southeast Asian descent, and the people at the bottom are the ones that are mixed with Black and South Asian descent, so like Indian, Pakistani, etc. There really isn't much out there about the Blasian identity, especially in the Western world. And I think the reason why it's so undocumented is because they don't have that proximity to whiteness. A lot of Chinese and Indian people migrated to the Western world, mainly in the Caribbean, but some in the United States and some in South America in the mid to late 19th century. And while all of these contracts were temporary and they would go back to their hometowns in a few years, or that was what the contract stated, a lot of them ended up staying in these areas in the West, and a decent amount of them did marry and procreate with Black people on these areas, causing for the Blasian offspring to be formed. And it just continued on throughout the next 150 years, and with more migrants from Asia, some from Africa, and some Asians and African descended people already being in the West. They just started intermixing, and Dukla and Blasian people started being born. So that's pretty much the gist of the history of it. When you look at the media, you rarely see Blasian people. I think the only Blasian person that I recall on reality TV from the shows that I watch is Kevin from Big Brother. There really isn't anyone else. When you look at Black media, Black television, you rarely see Blasians there. You don't see them at all on Asian television or Asian media, and you don't see them on white or mainstream media as well. When you do see them on media, you would see them on Black media because a lot of non-white communities still are colorist and they have colorism within their own communities. So of course they would have that same rhetoric to darker skinned people who are not of their own racial makeup. So anyone who has a drop of black, i.e. Blasians, would automatically be out othered from the Asian community and lumped in with black people. But even within the black community, black people are more familiar with black and white biracial people compared to black and Asian biracial people. So if they're going to include a biracial person, they are more often than not going to include a black and white biracial too. So I think that's why the black and Asian biracial people are so invisible when it comes to the media, and they are a lot more isolated from their communities because they are double minorities as well. When it comes to phenotype and appearance, there's definitely a lot of interest to discuss. I noticed that many of them tend to have wider noses, and while on average, Asian people, especially East and South Asian people, and Black people tend to have wider noses, but they're very different type of wide noses. So you definitely have the mix of the two different types of white noses in Blasian people. Some of them are lighter skin, but there's definitely a lot of brown, dark skinned Blasian people, and I don't know if it's due to some of the Blasians either being Southeast Asians, which are or whom are generally darker than East Asians, or outright South Asians are darker than both. So a South Asian and African person is obviously going to be very dark skinned. But the people here are East and Southeast Asian and Black. They have that specific admixture, and there's definitely a lot of deep browns here. And I noticed that they're generally darker than the average Black and white biracial person. Of course, you have a lot of variety when it comes to their hair textures. Some of them have bone straight hair, some of them have very coily hair, and very in between. And a lot of them you can definitely tell by their eyes that they have Asian ancestry as well. And even by some of the way that their mouths are shaped too, you can definitely see the blend of both races. So when it comes to half Indian, half black people, they in general are dark or very dark brown skinned. I've never seen a light Douglas person, which kind of makes sense because South Asians in general are on the darker end, and black people, whether you're African American, Caribbean, or African, are dark on average. So their mixed offspring would be dark. You definitely have a wide range of hair textures and hair types, as some are coily and some are very curly, and some are actually pretty wavy. Some of them, on average, have thinner noses, though they still have some of those black features when it comes to their nose as well. They usually have very thick lips, since I think both groups have thick lips, though they're definitely different. And they definitely have a more antiquated look to them, as they have a lot of the features that define both groups, and it causes for a very interesting blend. And Douglas are more commonly seen in Guyana, Suriname, I believe, Trinidad, and to a lesser extent, Jamaica, though you see them in other places as well, where an Indian and a black person can just have a relationship or an interaction and they procreate. And I really don't see many Douglas in the industry, though there are a lot of them who are like 3/4 black and 1/4 Indian, or 3/4 Indian and 1/4 black, but I'm specifically focusing on the ones who are half and half for the content of the video and for the purpose of the video. Yet again, there really isn't much information on the people who are mixed with Black and Pacific Islander, but just from what I could see and look at, they still have the very broad nose, the very thick lips, and the darker skin tone. And I think this is the case because a lot of Pacific Islanders are confused with being Black, or a lot of them are called Black, but they are very different because they, in general, were the first people who migrated from Africa way back in the prehistoric times. They went through Asia, then they went through the oceans, and they settled in the Pacific Islands. And because they were so isolated, they really didn't change while everywhere else continued with the migration within other communities and the intermixing throughout the thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So that's why there are some similarities between an African person or a person of African descent and a Pacific Islander. So when they mix and have offspring, they tend to look relatively similar due to this. Though some of them definitely have looser hair textures, and you can definitely tell that there's something else to them. And then we have people who are half black and half Native American. And I noticed that they, in general, tend to have wider or puffier faces. They mainly have the slanted eyes. Some of them have the typical black nose, while others have like the slanted noses or the arch noses that a lot of Native Americans are associated with. Some of them have coily hair, some of them have curly hair, and they on average are usually pretty dark skinned, just from the little that I've seen of them. And the history is that there are a decent amount of Native Americans and black people. And by Native Americans, I'm talking about the ones in the two continents, meaning North America and South America. A lot of them did start to intermingle and procreate with one another throughout history, especially as both groups were slaves. And honestly, there were some places where natives owned black people as slaves as well, though that's very undocumented. And it's just something that's happened throughout history in the West, and it leads to the admixture now. In conclusion, those are all of the different types of mixed race people. And I might have missed a few, though I really don't think I did, and I went out of my way to group in the different type of biracial people. And I do think the biracial identity and the mixed identity needs to be something that is acknowledged worldwide and needs to be put on all the census bureaus so we can have the most accurate representation in all forms of media. And so people, whether they are monoracial or multiracial, don't feel like their identities are being erased. It is great to acknowledge that the differences that we have as humans and as a group of people when it comes to race, as it just adds different types of layers, different flavors, and it makes the world go round. They also have such a unique experience that no monoracial group can relate to or has ever gone through, with having these two mixes of people who aren't alike and not really being fully accepted by either side, though probably being forced to identify with one side over another, and you feeling invisible because you don't relate to either. And I think that's something that needs to be talked about and addressed more. But because the media likes to be so linear and the proletariats like to be so linear with how they want certain people to be represented, it causes for them to be overshadowed and the nuances of their experiences to be overshadowed and to be confused with the monoracial experience, which isn't the same. I really don't have much else to say. Hopefully, you like the content, and I'll be back with more soon, and hopefully, it won't take too long until I release my next video. Take care, everyone.